Hey everybody, Sam Pedro here, and today I'm going to be talking about the books I read in June 2020. I read 12 books this month, and so for the year I have read 87 books so far, and we're about the halfway point. But in today's video, I'm going to talk about the books that I read in June, which ones I liked, which ones I didn't like, and share some of my thoughts and takeaways for each book. If you could hit the like button below and subscribe to my channel, that'd be greatly appreciated. I read some exceptional books in the month of June, and I'm excited to talk about them. I want to start with the book that I loved the most, and that was the book Just Mercy, which was written by Bryan Stevenson. And this was an eye-opening book, and I can't say enough good things about it. But Bryan Stevenson is a lawyer who has dedicated his life to fighting against bias towards minorities and children and the poor members of our society, especially when it comes to unfair sentencing, wrongful convictions, and death row issues. He has worked with countless clients, and so he shares their stories and their examples here in this book. And it was eye-opening, like I mentioned. It was also a pretty sad book to just think that in many cases, our American system of justice has failed a large portion of the people, and that's what it goes through, and it really opens your eyes towards these issues. The most notable example in the book is of Walter McMillian, who was a black man from Alabama who was wrongfully convicted of murder and sentenced to die. Stevenson helps win his freedom back and fights his case, and it was really appalling to read how he was framed and he was sentenced to die, largely because of the color of his skin. And so this is just one example. I learned so much about some of the bias in our justice system. I think everybody should read this book. There's so much to learn and to gain from reading this book. And I think Bryan Stevenson is inspirational. He's dedicated his life to fighting for these people. And I think he really does display mercy and love and compassion on a whole nother level, a level that I'm trying to attain. So I'm grateful for his example. So yeah, go check out Just Mercy. The next book I read was Roughing It by Mark Twain. And this was a very interesting book. So it was published in 1872. So it's one of the older books I think I've ever read. But Mark Twain, he took a trip to the West, the American West, with his brother. And this whole book is just talking about stories from that trip. And I was mostly interested in it because he goes through Salt Lake City and he meets with Brigham Young. And I'm from Utah, and I was just very interested in what he had to say about his time among the Mormons and in Salt Lake City. Overall, I enjoyed this book. It was really entertaining. It was written years after he took the trip, so I think some of the stories were maybe a little embellished, and kind of he added his own style to it. So I don't know how truthful all the stories are, but I was entertained. Even a book that is so old, 150 years old, I still found it really entertaining. I thought the stories were really interesting. I learned a lot about his trip to Salt Lake City, and he quoted full pages from the Book of Mormon, which I really found interesting. After Salt Lake City, he ends up in Nevada and also in California, and he spends a lot of his time mining, and so he talks about what mining life was like. And yeah, it was an interesting book. If you have an interest in the American West history in that time period, or if you're a fan of Mark Twain, I think you'd enjoy this book. And yeah, so go check out Roughing It by Mark Twain. The third book I read was An Astronaut's Guide to Life by Chris Hadfield. And this is the third book this year that I've read about an astronaut. So I read Spaceman by Mike Massimino, I read Endurance by Scott Kelly, and then this book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life. And I found it really interesting reading about the lives of astronauts, because what it takes to become an astronaut is just a crazy career path. I think something like 1 in every 7 million Americans becomes an astronaut. And so these are men and women who are very motivated and capable and very smart, and they are ambitious and want to become an astronaut, and they try to set their lives up so that when an opportunity comes to be an astronaut, they're able to take it. And so I think I've really enjoyed learning about their lives, just because it's so outrageous to become an astronaut, and just to see people who've actually done that. But I did like this one. I thought this was pretty enjoyable. So Chris Hadfield, he's logged 4,000 hours of space time. And I think the clearest messages I took away from this book is he really stresses the importance of preparing and also enjoying life at the same time. And he just goes through, why you got to be extremely prepared for anything, especially as an astronaut. You go over things over and over and over again because no mistakes can be made. And then he really stresses also that you got to enjoy life while you're doing these things, even when it's work and it's hard work. Find a way to enjoy it. And yeah, I really liked this book. I think of the 3 books I've read about astronauts, I liked Spaceman by Mike Massimino the most, and then An Astronaut's Guide to Life, and then Endurance. The next book I read was Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and this is a science book, and it was published at the same time as his TV show Cosmos, and it has 13 chapters that just kind of looks at science and space from the very beginning of the universe till kind of the present day and where mankind's going. I found it really interesting. I did learn a lot. I think his goal really is to speak the language of science on a level where anyone, the average man could be able to understand it. And so yeah, I did learn a lot. I don't know if it's like my all-time favorite, but I did enjoy it. The next book I read was Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama. I already made a video for this book, so I'll put a link here to if you want a more detailed review and summary of the book. Basically, this book was written in the mid-90s, so long before Barack Obama was the president or a senator. And he kind of just details, it's like a memoir of his upbringing and his life in Hawaii, and also him going into college and then eventually going to Chicago. And I will say, for the most part, I was pretty bored with the book, and you can see my review for more details. Kind of interesting. I'm glad I read it, but it wasn't my all-time favorite. So the next book I read was To the Rescue, which is the biography of Thomas S. Monson. And I already did a video about this one, so I'll put a link here if you want a more detailed review and summary. I love this book. I've been trying to make an attempt to read more about the leaders of my church, and I'm learning so much about their life and their example. I learned a lot just about being a better person and thinking about others first. And so I would recommend that. I think he's a great example of Christ-like love. The next book I read was George Lucas, A Life, and this is a biography about George Lucas. I did a video for this one too. I learned so much. I had a lot of fun with this book, just learning about his influence on technology and the kind of some behind the scenes of him creating and filming Star Wars. So yeah, go check this out, especially if you love Star Wars or you have any interest there. I had a lot of fun with it. The next book I read was Democracy in One Book or Less, which was written by David Litt. Last month I read the book Thanks Obama, which was written by David Litt, and this led me to this book. And this book was actually published in June 2020, so brand new. I did enjoy this book. I made a video, so I'll link that and just kind of briefly say it's mostly about like voting and how voting favors some people more than others and some candidates more than others. I learned a lot of interesting things going on in our democracy about how votes are counted. So if that sounds interesting to you, go and check out this book. Another book I read was Go Forward with Faith by Sherry Dew. This is a biography about Gordon B. Hinckley, who was a prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is the second time I've read this book. Gordon B. Hinckley is one of my personal heroes. Just reading about his life is so inspiring. His focus on learning and reading, and also just being, a good person. I learned so much from his example. I'm going to do a separate video for this one. I haven't recorded it yet, but there's just so much to learn from his life, and so I'll share those thoughts in a later video. Okay, so the next book I read was The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone, and this was an interesting book. So this is a self-help business book that really tries to get you to think things on a grander scale. So you 10x everything. You work 10 times harder. You set 10 times loftier goals. You work 10 times smarter. That's kind of the thinking that it has. There were a lot of gems here. I did learn a lot. It was inspiring. One of the big things for him is the words massive action. So just applying massive action to everything and setting massive goals. So the next book I read was a book called So You Want to Talk About Race. So this is another book that explores racism in America. And when I compare this to Just Mercy, the books both have the same message, but I felt like Just Mercy just does a way better job at teaching you and opening your eyes about what racism is and the current state of racism in our country, and helped inspire me to want to do a better job. Whereas I felt like So You Want to Talk About Race, the author is really passionate, but sometimes that passion was a little too much, and I felt like her message was kind of like in absolutes. So if you're white, you must be racist. If you're a police officer, you must be racist. And so even though I did learn a lot from this book, and I think it's still worth checking out. So those are the 12 books that I read in the month of June. I read some phenomenal books. I loved most of the books that I read. I think my favorite books I read were Just Mercy and Go Forward with Faith by Sheri Dew. I also really loved How Will You Measure Your Life and Roughing It by Mark Twain, and also An Astronaut's Guide to Life. Leave a comment below if you've read any of these books, or if you're now planning on reading some of these books. I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts. And yeah, if you like this video, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and I hope you all have a good day.